So after this past week's episode of Loki, there's been a lot of discussion on Loki becoming the god of stories. And you can kind of see why, right? Like, so much of last week's episode was all about the crafting of a story, or more accurately, Loki going on this personal journey in someone else's story to gain the power to gain control of the story so that he can now be the one writing the story. Not only that, but there is an actual omnibus that released earlier this year called Loki, God of Stories. So, a lot of people are kind of putting two and two together and saying, oh, maybe Loki is becoming the God of Stories. But on this past week's Loki TV Talk podcast, I kind of, on an offhand reference, just pointed out, there actually is a God of Stories in Norse mythology. Bragi, the God of Stories. God of poetry and mead. The best stuff. Bragi being the god of poetry. Over the years, there have been several poets that actually went by the name Bragi. So much so to the extent that historians aren't quite sure if Bragi the god was developed based off of these poets, or if the poets chose to take the name of Bragi because of the name recognition that came with it. And interestingly enough, this is a character that has appeared in Marvel Comics, but we haven't seen him since the 80s. So not exactly one that they're probably going to introduce in this, MCU. I mean, they do deep cuts, don't get me wrong, but I don't think they're going to go that deep. But it is worth noting that the Bragi of Norse mythology and Loki don't exactly have the best relationship. As with all the Aesir gods, they all kind of have this frenemy thing that goes on with Loki from time to time. If they need some trickstering done, or if they, got to make a deal with the devil, he's the devil that you know. And there's actually a few tales where Bragi and Loki are either at odds or working together, but then end up at odds. But there's one story that I did want to reference where Bragi and Loki kind of have a quick bash between the two, and that is in the Locasenna. Now, this is a fantastic, hot mess of a story. It's like all of your reality TV, top moments mixed into one. And I say this as somebody who, frankly, has not watched a single bit of reality TV, but I've seen the commercials. Basically, this is like a commercial for a reality TV show. It's a big party where everybody's drunk and Loki just totally roasts everybody that's there. Now, it starts off fine. Everybody's having a good time, except for Loki. Loki's a little bitter and upset, and so he kills a dude. This ends up upsetting all the other Aesir, and they kick him out. Well, Loki didn't like being kicked out of the party, so he talks his way back in. Being the trickster that he is, Odin actually had made a long-time deal with Loki that he was not going to drink mead unless Loki could drink mead. And of course, Odin wanted to drink mead at this party. So he's like, all right, guys, you know what? He's got to kind of be here because I'm not stopping the party. So I'm going to drink, which means he needs to drink. So Loki gets his way back in the door. Everybody's just staring him down, mind you. They're all looking down at Loki. Nobody knows what's going to happen. They just kicked him out of the party. And the worst part about it is Loki's sitting back. He's got this big Loki-esque grin on his face because he came to talk trash and chew bubblegum, and he's all out of bubblegum. The first person to step up and actually confront him is Bragi, the god of stories, the god of poetry. Now, Odin shuts Bragi down because of the whole I want to drink situation, but Loki uses this as an opportunity to toast everybody there. He raises his horn of mead and he, says, oh, all you guys are great. Y'all are like the best gods. Everyone's great, except for Bragi. That guy's the worst. And so Bragi is sitting here, he's fuming. And these two are starting to throw insults at each other, right? And Bragi, again, god of stories against the god of lies, the god of mischief. Words are, in fact, their weapons. But Bragi finds himself outmatched when going toe-to-toe with Loki. Loki has come to spit hot fire towards everybody. Bragi's wife actually steps in. She's like, hey, honey, just calm down. Loki, everything's good. Let's just have a party. Loki proceeds to call her a very friendly lady. How do I keep this video from being demonetized? You know what? Let me put it this way. You can't talk about the Locasenna story in detail and not be demonetized to some extent. It gets brutal. Every single god, Aesir god, steps up to confront Loki and calls him out for just being a jerk. And he absolutely eviscerates them. He insults them, insults their mothers, insults their lovers, insults their mother's lovers. He goes all in on everybody. Frigga even steps up and says, if my son Balder was here, then he would shut you up. And Loki's like, oh, I'm sorry. Is that your son Balder that, I murdered? It's bad. It's bad. So ultimately, Loki comes through and he gets exactly what he wants. He completely ruins this party. And so in anger, the Aesir all gather together to hunt Loki down and they tie him up. And they feel like, okay, he came to our party and he insulted us all. What is the appropriate retribution? We'll tie him up with his children's remains and we'll drop poisonous venom on him for all eternity. That'll definitely show him. And so that's what they do. And as the venom kind of comes down in its largest quantity, it causes Loki to periodically just writhe in pain. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we have earthquakes. Mythology is fun. It's a lot of fun. Obviously, the MCU has taken all of their characters in very different places from their original Norse-inspired origins. And as I'm sitting here making this video, I have no clue what they're going to do with the final episode of Loki. They may very well choose to declare him the new god of stories. But should that be the case, I think it's good for all of us to at least acknowledge the OG himself, the god of poetry, the god of mead. Let's raise a glass or a tankard or a horn to toast Bragi, the original Norse god of stories.